Hi, hey, hello, how's it going? And today I want to talk through my favorite books of 2023, and I want to get through these pretty quickly. I will note that these are in mostly chronological order from how I read them. They're not in a ranking or ranked order, and these are books that I read last year. They weren't necessarily published last year, but let's just dive right in. The first one I want to talk about is The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. Here we're following Esme, and we follow her throughout her life, and she is surrounded by people who are creating the first Oxford English Dictionary, and she gets to see the process of how it's getting made. She gets to see some words get excluded from the dictionary and some be included, and she gets to come to understand what it truly means for people who have a certain perspective and are very well off decide what words get to go into the dictionary. She comes to understand that not everyone's words are included, so she starts talking to people and basically making her own dictionary of words that are used by everyday people and can be important to people but aren't in the dictionary. And we see her relationships as they grow and develop throughout her life, her relationship with her father, her relationship with certain people in this town, and it's just beautiful. It's beautiful. It was emotional. I thought the writing was excellent. I fell in love with these characters, and it was just fascinating and well-grounded in research for what actually happened creating the first Oxford English Dictionary. Super interesting. Next one I want to talk about is Tress of the Emerald Sea, and this was my favorite of the secret projects by Brandon Sanderson that he was releasing last year. Here we follow Tress, and she lives on this island and has never been off this island. She doesn't particularly feel called to adventure, but when someone that she really cares about leaves the island for political reasons and doesn't come back, she takes it upon herself to go find him. And so it's her adventures along the way. It was whimsical, it was fun. I enjoyed the perspective of the narrator and who was narrating the story, and the humor. I just thought it all worked together so well, and I adore Tress. I thought the adventure was so much fun, and again, I laughed so many times while reading this one. I also, of those secret projects, also really enjoyed Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. So in this one we're following Yumi and Painter, and they get into a weird situation. Something happens and they get into a situation where they basically go into each other's world. So there are times where Painter is brought into Yumi's world, but they've switched bodies, or like he's invisible, but they've also switched bodies. So Painter is in Yumi's body, and Yumi, who is invisible, needs to coach him through how to live her life. She's a religious figure who does these ceremonies to bring luck to the people that she's doing these ceremonies for, and to kind of curry the favor of the gods. So she needs to teach him how to do these things, and they're also sucked into Painter's world, where they haven't, I think in that one they don't switch bodies, but he's invisible and she needs to kind of basically cover for him, and he's also trying to investigate some things that are going on with the nightmares in his world, and so she needs to help him do that. Anyway, it was romantic. I had so much fun with this one. The writing was gorgeous. I love these characters. I love them together. They basically need to work together to figure out how to undo this situation and solve some of the things that are going on in their respective worlds. Absolutely beautiful. I also really enjoyed Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Our main character is Emily Wilde, and shockingly she is making an Encyclopedia of Fairies, and we're following, this is kind of her academic notebook, so it's written with a very unique style. And Emily is going to like a northern remote town to document some stuff going on with the Fae up there, and is having a difficult time ingratiating herself to this town, to this community, and one of her colleagues slash rivals comes up to join her. He has no problem doing this, and so they have a bit of an interesting dynamic and get into a bunch of fae shenanigans up there. And again, whimsical, fun, romantic, and just charming. Just really, really charming. I had a great time with that one. I also really loved The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, and the other one was by Heather Fawcett, if I didn't mention that. Anyway, and in here we're following Amina Al-Sarafi, who is retired but was one of the most notorious captains on the Seven Seas, and she was a pirate and, you know, very infamous for her captaining her crew. But as I mentioned, she's retired, she's taking care of her daughter, and someone who is the mother of one of her former crewmates, her granddaughter, his daughter, has been kidnapped. And so, you know, the grandmother comes to Amina and says, I will pay you a ton of money to go find my granddaughter. And Amina ultimately accepts and goes on another adventure, kind of gets the crew back together to go find this girl and figure out what happened. And there are so many adventures, so many different creatures along the way, so much happening, and it was just a blast. It was just a blast. Next one I want to mention is Mirage by Samaya Dowd, and in this one we're following it's kind of a really awesome sci-fantasy blend. So our main character lives on the moon, and the main planet is occupied by a group of people who have just kind of come in and conquered and kind of forced our main character's people to this moon, but they're trying to survive. And so one day there are these droid-like figures, and they have scanned our main character's face, and they take her to the main planet and bring her to the princess. It turns out that she looks remarkably like the princess, and they want her to kind of act as a double, a bodyguard, someone to take the princess's place when things get dangerous. And so she's basically forced into this position, and again is trying to figure out what to do. She's starting to connect to some of the rebel forces, and it's a blast. It's again super fun. I need to continue on in this series really soon. And speaking of needing to continue on in series very soon, I also really loved Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. And in this one we're following a couple of characters who are rivals or competing for the same promotion at this newspaper. It's set in a vaguely World War I or II historic English type setting. There is a war going on, but it's a war between gods that people are involved in, including her brother. And you know, there's this promotion. One of them also goes to be a war correspondent, and in the process of all of this, they find or both have access to magical typewriters, and she starts to write letters thinking that she's writing to her brother, but he's actually, our other main character is the one actually getting them and responding. And so they start to get to know each other, and it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. I love the writing. The setting was very immersive, and I love this one so much. Next one I want to talk about is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This one was the most compulsively readable book I think I read last year, and we follow our main character June Hayward, whose friend Athena, more of a frenemy to be honest, and June is very jealous of Athena's success. They're both writers, but Athena's had a lot more success than June has. Athena dies by an accident one night while hanging out with June, and June takes advantage and steals Athena's manuscript, and Athena hasn't shared it with her agent, her editor. No one knows the details of this manuscript, and June is going to pass it off as her own. She's also going to try to publish it under her full name. Her full first and middle name is Juniper Song Hayward, But she tries to publish it under Juniper Song instead of June Hayward, which is how she's published all of her other books, and is also using the most racially ambiguous author photo that she can find, and basically trying to pass this off as her own work, but also trying to pass herself off to people who don't know her as Asian. So because the story that she has stolen is about Chinese laborers in World War I. And so, anyway, it's fascinating. June is not a good person, but it is a ride to be in her head. It was a ride. It was a journey. I was just really engaged and had a lot of fun with that one. Next one I want to talk about is Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. If you want a political dragon story, check this one out. So in here we're following Annie and Lee, and they grew up at this orphanage, or know each other from growing up at this orphanage, but they have very different backgrounds. So there was a revolution, I think it was like 10 years before the story starts, and her family was definitely not in a great position in the old regime. They were some of the people persecuted, and his family were some of the aristocrats, or some of the most politically powerful people in this old regime. There was this revolution. His family was killed in the process of this revolution. Her family had died because of the people who used to be in charge. And so, yeah, they grew up at this orphanage. It's some years later. They are both trying to be some of the top dragon riders that help this new regime, but they both have very complicated feelings about it. One, because of his past, but also, what do you do when the political structure that you have fought for and had supported starts to make some decisions and pursue some actions that make them seem like they're, in fact, not too much better than the regime that had been there before? What do you do? It's fascinating. The characters were super complicated and just so real, and the politics was also super complicated. I thought this one was fascinating. I loved it. Next one I want to talk about is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. This was charm and whimsy and romance and coziness all in one beautiful package. So we're following Mika Moon, who is a witch. She's been told all of her life that witches can't really gather a lot in one place, or their magic might become too powerful. So she's grown up very isolated and makes YouTube videos pretending to be a witch, but someone realizes that it's very real and invites her to go out to mentor 3 witches who live at this house. And she falls in love with these kids. She falls in love with someone who runs this house, and I loved everything about this. I also want to mention Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. I think if you enjoyed Legends and Lattes, I think you'll have a good chance of liking this one. This is a summer cozy book, which I didn't realize going into it. This takes place before Legends and Lattes. Viv is a mercenary and has become injured in this process. She needs to heal, and is healing by this seaside town that has this bookshop, and she gets to know this town through the bookshop and the owner and her friendship with the owner. It's delightful. It's delightful. I think this one had a little bit more of a plot than the first one, but really it's just for the cozy vibes. The last fiction book I want to mention is A Curse for True Love by Stephanie Garber. I just adore this series. This is the 3rd and final book in this series, and it's fairy tale vibes. I think Stephanie Garber nails the whimsical fairy tale vibes here, and we're following Evangeline, whose one true love is about to marry someone else, and she thinks that he's been cursed to do this or put under a spell to do this. And so she's trying to stop this wedding and rescue her true love. And she calls upon Jax, who is it the King of Broken Hearts? Is that how he's described? She calls on Jax to help, but of course this comes at a price. And this just sets off a whole adventure for Evangeline. And again, very fairy tale vibes that were so much fun. I also wanted to mention one nonfiction book, and that is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And I would love to go back and annotate this gorgeous copy. But the subtitle is Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants, which I think says it all. It's about her experience with Indigenous knowledge and kind of growing up in that world, but also has a PhD in botany. So she also, has grown up with a certain perspective, but also, again, got a PhD and has gone through various processes with Western science as well, and has a very unique perspective to be able to talk about this. And it was fascinating. It was incredibly well written. I listened to the audiobook and she narrates it herself and did a fantastic job. Just fascinating. I think everyone should read this. Just hands down, I think everyone should read this. So those were some of the books that stood out to me last year. I hope better late than never in terms of posting this. But let me know if you've read any of these or if you have recommendations based on my enjoyment of these books. And let me know what some of your favorite books were from last year. I would love to know. And I will link my Instagram down below, as well as more information about how you can support the Black Lives Matter movement. And I will see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.